There is a new government in the United Kingdom. The Labour Party is back in power, ending 14 years of Conservative rule with a historic election victory. Labour has nearly two-thirds of the seats in Parliament, but smaller parties gain ground as well. The CBC's Briar Stewart has more.
Britain's new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, was cheered as he arrived at Downing Street after a landslide win.
Our work is urgent, and we begin it today.
Even before all of the ballots were counted, it was clear that British voters handed the Labour Party a big victory, and the Conservatives a humiliating defeat. Under leader Rishi Sunak, the Tories won their fewest seats since the party was founded nearly 200 years ago.
I have heard your anger, your disappointment, and I take responsibility for this loss.
He said he would step down as party leader, but not right away. Shortly after Sunak was out, a procession of soon-to-be Labour cabinet ministers arrived one by one as government business got underway.
Most governments go through some kind of honeymoon.
This political scientist says despite the outcome, there doesn't appear to be overwhelming public enthusiasm for Labour.
Oppositions don't win elections, governments lose them. I think Keir Starmer had brought the Labour Party back into the centre of British politics and given people at least a safe alternative to vote for, which they didn't feel they had.
Millions also cast their ballots for smaller parties. Britain's Liberal Democrats walked away with around 70 seats, while Reform UK, a right-wing party, won 5.
You're going to bring us division.
Its leader, Nigel Farage, was heckled during his press conference, a sign of the simmering divisiveness.
Boring.
The new Parliament will meet next week, but there are no illusions that the much-promised change will be quick.
To change our infrastructure, our healthcare systems, it's going to take 10 years.
I think it hopefully will change. Let's stay optimistic, but I'm weary of it, so I'm sceptical.
Even before the new Parliament officially begins, Keir Starmer will be off on his first international event as Prime Minister. He's going to Washington, D.C. next week for the NATO summit. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
Well, as Briar just said, Rishi Sunak's Conservatives suffered a massive election defeat. Conservatives have seen their vote share fall by about 20 points to just under 24%. For more on the state of the UK Conservative Party, former UK Conservative MP Andy Percy joins me again tonight. Andy, long time no talk. It's good to see you again.
Nice to be back so soon.
When we last spoke, all we had were the exit polls. Now we've got the actuals. The Conservatives down to 121 seats. What are your thoughts on the ultimate outcome last night?
Well, I mean, throughout this campaign, we've had these polls which have been showing this, annihilation of the Conservative Party in large parts of the country. And, those polls have been proven to be true. In fact, actually, the party's done slightly worse than even the exit poll had predicted. I did think they might do slightly better. There are a number of stories from this election, really. Is obviously the disaster that has befallen the Conservative Party, but within it, there's also a range of other stories. The Scottish nationalists have been all but wiped out in their Scottish seats. And we've had this huge Labour majority, but actually Labour have only put on 2% vote share. So they managed to get to 34%, which is just 2% above the 2019 general election, which was in itself one of their worst showings. So they managed to deliver this very big majority without what looks to be a lot of enthusiasm from the public generally. People just wanted rid of the Tories this time.
Well, last night we talked a lot about the comparisons, or at least on the expectation front, with the 93 election here in Canada. And I know it's not the 2 seats that the Progressive Conservatives went to. But if you look at Reform taking 14% of the vote, coming second in many constituencies, electing about 5 MPs, that seems to have really helped Labour in a massive way and just knocked the top off the ceiling of the Conservatives. This is a big challenge for the party going forward.
It is. I mean, I think we said last night, we've avoided the 93 type Canada Tory result because the Reform vote wasn't regionally based as that Reform vote was out west in 93. But what they have done to the Conservative Party by polling, 20, 25% in large swathes of the country, and in some places doing even better than that, is hand Conservative constituencies to Labour, who in many of them have, struggled to get much above a third of the vote to win the seat. and I think they're second now in 100 places, 100 constituencies. So there's a big challenge here for the Conservative Party, but there's actually also one for Labour. In a lot of Labour seats in the north, Reform are snapping at their heels now. Having just come into government. Being in government is a process of watching your vote basically disintegrate over a decade or so before you get
fair
out. So there's an issue for the Labour Party there as well in some of those Labour heartlands where Reform did very, very well. But immediately the real problem is for the Conservative Party and how it responds to this. Does it try and become a Reform light, which I think would be a disaster for the Conservative Party, or does it try and refine its broad-based heritage, which is what's made the Conservative Party the most successful political party on the planet?
So what do you think they do? Like, I take your point that certainly Reform coming second in a lot of the very early Labour constituencies is a challenge over time. But immediately there is going to be a leadership vacuum soon in the Conservative Party. There will be a leadership race there, and there will be a fight for the soul of the party. And Farage does have this charisma and gravitational force to him in his political movement, and he's got 14% of the vote or whatever it is. How do you think that dynamic plays out in the short term, Andy?
Well, look, you can look at this two ways. Now, every party Nigel Farage has led, be it the Brexit Party or the UK Independence Party, has ended up squabbling amongst itself, and normally has ended up with good chunks of it disappearing off or leaving the party. So that may happen again. But the other side of it is, as you said, Nigel Farage has this ability to drive people towards him. He's a very charismatic character. People think, he's somebody you'd like to have a pint with down the pub, and he tells it as it is in a way other politicians don't. Now, maybe being in the House of Commons will expose him, or the other side of this is he's got he'll have a platform actually within the political system, so it's easy. It's less easy for the establishment to ignore him and for the media to perhaps ignore him. So I think it's very much still a watch this space. I'm not sure which way it will go with Farage, but I fear, he's a permanent force in British politics now, it looks like.
You would obviously know the makeup of what's left of the Conservatives after last night. A lot of the analysis that I have seen, with the notable exceptions of people like Liz Truss and Jacob Rees-Mogg, is that a lot of the casualties were the center-left, moderate, middle of the party, and it's a lot of the hard right that survived, which creates a challenge, right? When you have Reform and a leadership case, if the MPs are mostly from the pro-Brexit, hard right side of the party in terms of where things go, how do you see that dynamic playing out?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I wouldn't necessarily call them hard right. I think that, but you're quite right to say many of them will be on the right of the party. I was a Brexiteer. I think it's still the right decision, but I would consider myself more on the left or centre of the party. The truth of it is, when you lose 240 of your MPs, you're losing people from right across the party. And the overwhelming majority of Conservative MPs actually find themselves broadly somewhere in the middle of the party. I think it's unclear at the moment as to where we will end up. And of course, it will ultimately be our membership that decides. And I would hazard a guess that the more right-wing candidate who makes it to because we send two through to our members, if that does happen, if the parliamentary party doesn't stitch up amongst themselves, if they send two forward, then my guess is the one who's seen as being on the right of the party will be the one who gets the leadership. And, look, it won't be the first time a Conservative Party in opposition has moved to its right flank in the same way that Labour in opposition often moved to their left flank. Right. I think that will be a mistake, and I think that trying to out-reform Reform would be a disaster for the party. It will only boost Reform. And the Conservative Party wins in our system here when it is placed firmly in the centre of British politics. And this will be a fight that I think will go on in the Conservative Party. And again, it's another thing that's unclear at this stage where that ends. Yeah. And to clarify what I say, I meant hard right relative within the confines of the Conservative Party. Certainly not as hard right as Reform UK. That's a whole other element of the political spectrum. But just to focus quickly on Keir Starmer, on the Labour Party, I mean, they are the big story. I know there's a tendency to focus on Farage because of the bright lights that always surround him. He lost a couple of people he expected to be key cabinet ministers, but he got a lot of his key people elected clearly. He has a massive majority, but as you say, only 34% of the vote. So it's a big parliamentary majority, but not necessarily a big popular majority. That creates some challenges if you're going to do kind of consequential things on your agenda. I mean, it really does. I mean, that, you know, they managed to put on 2% nationally. They lost 4% in Wales, but actually won way more seats in Wales than they won last time. And of course, they had this sweep in Scotland where they just absolutely obliterated the separatists, the Scottish nationalists. But coming in as 34% is, you know, a very, very low figure for a new government, I think, and with a massive majority. So I think this is really going to be a problem for Keir Starmer. There is the polling throughout, which has shown consistently Labour were going to win a big majority, has also similarly shown that there's not a lot of faith amongst the British electorate. The same people who've been polled who would say they're going to deliver a big Labour majority have also in those polls said they don't really have a great deal of confidence in Keir Starmer. Now, maybe he'll outperform, and coming from a very low expectation level maybe isn't a bad thing. But I suspect that, you know, what we'll actually see is huge pressure on them very quickly. I think this has the potential for Labour to unravel very quickly because, as I said, when, you know, 2/3 of the country very definitely didn't vote for them yesterday, and very clearly wanted rid of the Tories. That was the biggest driving factor. It wasn't a 90. They've ended up with a result similar to 97, as I think I said last night, but without any of the enthusiasm or the levels of support Blair received. And I think this is problematic for them in the longer term.
It's fascinating to look at the way the parliament is constituted and the way the vote shares went, right? 34% of the vote gets you 2/3 of the seats. You've got Reform getting 5 seats with 14%. The Lib Dems, less than the 14%, but 71 seats because they had this massive vote efficiency in very specifically locally targeted ridings. And that's the way the first past the post system works. But it kind of bears no resemblance to the broader will of the electorate, right? Do you think that'll be a conversation given the variance between Reform and the Lib Dems?
Yeah, I mean, there's an analysis this evening saying this is the worst election, as it were, for parties getting what they should in terms of their vote share. Now, I'm a defender of first past the post because I think first past the post is what protects us from extremists generally. You know, the reason the far right are sweeping across over in Europe is because electoral reform is allowing some very extreme parties to get into national legislatures. First past the post protects against that. And there will be an inevitable question of electoral reform after this election, particularly as it seems to be so out of kilter. However, what I would say is, I think what first past the post does is it delivers the result the public wants, but it exaggerates the result. So there is no doubt the country wanted rid of the Conservative Party yesterday, and there is no doubt that they understood to do that, Labour had to be the government. Now, and the public got that result. That's what I think the result is, what the country was expecting, was voting for. All it's done is it just exaggerates it. But there will inevitably be this. And of course, when everyone's in opposition, they flirt with proportional representation. But when it's just delivered you 2/3 of the seats on 1/3 of the vote, I strongly suspect the Labour voices for electoral reform will be very, very quiet.
Yeah, and the Lib Dems, who always advocate for it, they really benefited from first past the post in this one. So we'll see where that one goes too, right?
Yeah, I mean, they actually did very well this time, and they broadly ended up with where they should be. I mean, you know, the Reform Party, of course, got 14% of the vote and only, I think, 1% of the seats. So they were very underrepresented, and of course, they'll scream and shout for it. But neither big party really has any interest in delivering electoral reform, because all it guarantees is that they'll never govern on their own again, probably.
Andy Percy, really appreciate your insight the last couple of days. That's former UK Conservative MP Andy Percy. Thanks so much, sir.
Pleasure, anytime.
There is a new government in the United Kingdom led by Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
Politics can be a force for good. We will show that. We've changed the Labour Party, returned it to service, and that is how we will govern.
The Labour Party has won nearly 2/3 of the 650 seats in the House of Commons, ending 14 years of Conservative rule. Defeated Conservative leader Rishi Sunak apologized for his performance and took responsibility for the defeat. So, how could new leadership change Canada-UK relations? Ralph Goodale is Canada's High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. High Commissioner, it's good to speak with you again. Thanks for joining us.
Very nice to see you again.
A significant election in the United Kingdom, a big change. How would you characterize this moment in UK politics?
Well, it is certainly big change. The absolute change in the popular vote for the Labour Party actually is not in itself huge, 2 or 3 points ahead of where they were in the last election. But the vote for the incumbent government, the Sunak government for the Conservative Party, suffered a major collapse by about 20 points. Most of that did not go to Labour, but rather went to a new party, the Reform Party, that has come into existence in the last period of time under Nigel Farage. And they have elected now, at last count, 5 members of Parliament to the new House of Commons. That's not a big number, 5 out of 650, but they did garner a significant chunk of popular vote, which otherwise would probably have gone Conservative, and it's the loss of that vote that cost the Conservatives a very substantial amount of seats in the British House of Commons. So it turns out to be a massive majority in favor of Labour.
Yeah, it's not quite what happened to the Conservatives with the Bloc and the Reform in 1993 in this country, but it is sort of that vote splitting on the right, which caused a disproportional gain by the centrist Labour Party. And I wonder what you think of this new government, High Commissioner, because Keir Starmer has really tried to drag Labour Party to sort of the center of the political spectrum after the sort of the Jeremy Corbyn years, where I believe he said to people he needed to decontaminate the brand, and he seems to have done that. So what is your sense of how they'll govern? They're kind of the centrist party, much like the Liberal governments you were a part of here in Canada.
They have certainly worked very hard to deliver the message that they are not scary. They propose no threat to either business or to the international relationships that the United Kingdom has. They have spent the last 2 years working very hard with the diplomatic corps, as well as with small business and large business in the UK, making the point that they can be trusted and be fully effective on national defense, on national security, on issues related to the economy. Their new Chancellor of the Exchequer, otherwise the Minister of Finance, is a former employee of the Bank of England. So they have tried to make it very clear that this is not a party that has any connection anymore with the rather frightening reputation of Jeremy Corbyn.
Yes, who was elected as an independent last night, interestingly enough, with a massive majority. But, strong on defense and no big shift away from current UK foreign policy, it seems, which is important with what's happening in Ukraine and with the NATO summit next week. I wonder, High Commissioner, the Canada-UK relationship, attempts to get a trade deal were stalled with the former Conservative government, cheese being a big issue there. Is there an opportunity for things to restart, maybe with a Labour government on that to enhance the trade relationship between Canada and the United Kingdom?
Well, we're certainly going to try. It was, of course, the United Kingdom that walked away from those previous trade discussions. Canada has always been available, always at the table, ready to further the negotiations. But it was the UK in January that decided they wanted a pause. Cheese was one of the issues that they mentioned at that time. What's interesting about that issue, David, is that it has nothing to do with Canada's supply management system. This is a problem that flowed from Brexit.
Right. Because
the cheese quota that the British were using in order to have access to the Canadian market was a quota that belonged to the European Union under our comprehensive economic and trade agreement with the EU. When the UK left the EU, they also left that trade agreement, and they left their cheese quota in Brussels. it's sort of like you get off an airplane. They always say to you, check around and make sure you've got all your belongings. But when the UK left the EU, they left some of their belongings behind. So this is a Brexit hangover. Right. It has nothing to do with our supply management system, but we're prepared to have a reasonable conversation with the UK to see if there are solutions to that issue and others. The relationship is good. I would hope that we could have a good discussion and see if we can find a solution that would put that trade issue to rest. Yeah. But in the meantime, one thing important to remember, we have a bilateral free trade agreement in place with the UK in any event. It was put in place in 2021, and it gives us 99% market access, tariff and duty free both ways. Right. So it's a pretty good deal already. We'll see if we can improve upon it.
Yeah, and I look, this is political change that's happening in Europe that I think Canadians can be comfortable with. You know, a shift to a centrist Labour Party is not as alarming as, say, what we may be seeing in the French elections coming up this weekend. But you know, you mentioned the Brexit hangover. This result is probably also a Brexit hangover. If you look at the way the Conservative vote went and with the split with Reform UK. What are your thoughts, High Commissioner, on where the Conservative movement goes in the United Kingdom after this? Because there's some hard right Brexiteers who survived. A lot of the moderates in that party were defeated. And as you say, Reform UK took a lot of votes. And some of the commentary I've seen is that there's going to be kind of a fight for the soul of conservatism in the United Kingdom in the wake of all of this. What are your thoughts on where that might go?
I think there will be a contest, yes. You could see that over the course of the last couple of years during the various leadership changes from Boris Johnson, who was a very ebullient populist, to Liz Truss, who was a very hard right on economic matters, ideological kind of prime minister, and then Mr. Sunak, who was pretty moderate in the middle. And when he took over from Ms. Truss, he stabilized the ship. He calmed down the markets. He brought a sense of good fiscal management to the situation. The problem for Mr. Sunak was that while he was applying probably all of the right economic prescriptions as a former chancellor and after that prime minister, they had long-term impacts. In other words, they weren't going to bear fruit within a month or two, or perhaps even a year or two. They may turn out to be the right policies in the long run, but it will be a couple of years from now before they actually pay off in political dividends. So Mr. Sunak was unfortunately caught in a bit of a time warp that made it very difficult for him. But all of those points of view are very vigorously represented in the Conservative Party within the House of Commons and outside the House of Commons. Ms. Truss, for example, was defeated last night. But we'll have to see which of those views actually comes to be the most predominant view, and they'll have to make the rational judgment which of those views is going to have the biggest impact in fending off the now elected Reform Party that previously was just a hypothetical, but now it's a political reality with 5 seats in the House of Commons. Not nearly as big as the Conservative caucus, but they do now have an elected voice.
Right, and Nigel Farage gets a perch, and that will be interesting to see how he uses that, given his role in Brexit. But one of the other issues, High Commissioner, was just this sentiment of change that a lot of incumbents are running into in elections, and we're seeing that here in Canada. You know Justin Trudeau well, you served with him. What are your thoughts on the situation here? After the by-election of St. Paul, people in caucus calling for the Prime Minister to go, demanding a meeting. What do you think the Prime Minister will do? What do you think he should do?
Well, David, as much as I might like to comment on Canadian politics, that's one line a diplomat can't cross. I can give you lots of advice on the British political situation, but not the Canadian. So I need to keep my counsel to myself on that situation. But it is a challenging time to be an incumbent. President Macron has found that in France. Obviously, Prime Minister Sunak found that here in the UK. President Biden is finding the same thing in the United States. It's a turbulent time. There's a lot of geopolitical uncertainty in the world. There are two wars that are raging. People are still struggling with the after effects of the pandemic. Here in the UK, they've got the added overlay of Brexit as well. It is a difficult time to be in government, wherever you may be around the world. And Mr. Starmer will immediately discover the realities of that. He's inheriting a situation that is going to demand every bit of expertise and talent on his part to be able to govern with the UK through these challenging conditions internationally that many other leaders around the world have been facing. They're now his issues, and he will have to show the leadership to give Britain the confidence that there's a way forward that will lead to success.
You know, I didn't think you'd bite on the question about the Prime Minister, but I had to ask anyway, so I appreciate it. Ralph Goodale, High Commissioner of Canada to the United Kingdom. Thanks for your time, sir.
Very good to talk to you, David. All the best.
10 Downing Street just confirmed the new UK Prime Minister has spoken with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. They say Trudeau congratulated Starmer on his win, and the two leaders discussed the importance of working together on issues such as trade, security, and support for Ukraine.